Hey everyone, welcome to Web Moments episode 11. Today we're going to talk about security. I've been thinking about this for a while, and it dawned on me that I hadn't really talked about it. So we're going to talk about a little bit about security, okay, and how to prevent your website from being hacked. To be specific, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of technical details, but I am going to talk about them. So the first thing is to keeping your website secure is to keep your software up to date. And this goes for even your operating systems like Windows or Mac OS or something like that. If you're using WordPress, keep your WordPress software up to date, or any other content management system or development framework or whatever. You want to keep those software packages up to date. The developers release updates for those all the time, and a lot of times they're releasing security patches and stuff like that. So keeping that stuff up to date is important. As far as WordPress goes, WordPress has a horrible reputation of getting hacked, not because of the WordPress developers. I want to be clear about that. But usually because of plugins. The WordPress team is actually really, really good about, addressing security issues in their software when it comes up and patching them. But the problem comes in with plugins that are made by third-party developers that you install on your website. Those developers are not always good about patching the software. They're not always good about writing the software to begin with. And sometimes they create vulnerabilities in the software. And I would venture to say that probably 95% of WordPress applications or sites that get hacked were probably because of a third-party plugin. So, keeping those plugins up to date also, and just be careful what you use, you'll have to do a little bit of research and find out on the software and whether or not it's good. The developers keep it up to date and stuff and patch it and write good software to begin with. So that's number one. Keeping that software up to date is a big deal. Number two, watch out for SQL injection. SQL injection is a technique where code is basically submitted through like a web form, and it's injected into your website, or it's injected into your database language. I'm trying to explain this to where it's understandable. It's sort of techie, but it's injected into your database language as code. So databases use a language called SQL, and that's why it's called SQL injection. And so in this technique, a hacker may go to a login form or any kind of form, really, and they would be able to type something into the form field and basically inject SQL code straight into your database and have your database execute something that you didn't originally intend it to execute. Things like deleting entire database tables can be done. So yeah, it's pretty bad. So you got to watch out for that and know how to prevent against those types of things. I will say on SQL injection, I don't think it's as common as it used to be because most frameworks and applications have put precautions in place for that. So I don't think it's as common as it used to be. I could be wrong on that. But anyway. The next thing is protect against XSS attacks. So XSS stands for cross-site scripting. And cross-site scripting is is an attack that injects malicious JavaScript into your pages, which then runs in your browsers. It can change, change page content. It can steal information. It can send an attacker information. Anything that the JavaScript language can do is something that, cross-site scripting could do also. Basically, it's taking a language that already exists for the web and tricking your website or web page into doing something that you didn't intend for it to do. Say like send an attacker, password information that your users are typing on their keyboards. So stuff like that. So yeah, it can be really bad too. And so that's something that you have to watch out for. Number 4 are passwords. And I've done a podcast on passwords before, an episode of Web Moments on passwords before, on what you should do and stuff like that as far as a user, creating your passwords, storing your passwords, stuff like that. I recommend LastPass. I've heard 1Password is good. So as far as a website creator or website owner, if you have a website where you're having people create passwords or put passwords into your site, it's a well-known technique that you are not supposed to store those passwords in clear text. So if you're doing that, or if you've ever been to a website where you forgot your password and you go in to reset your password, or you click the forgot your password link and enter an email address, and then that website emails you back your password, then they're storing their passwords in clear text. A website should never be able to email your password. A website shouldn't even know what your password is. They should have no way of finding out what your password is. And the reason for that is the password should be stored hashed. So hashing is basically a one-way encryption type algorithm that you run your password text into it, and it creates a random string of characters that is stored in the password. And the way it checks your password when someone logs in is it regenerates that hash. And if they enter the correct password, then the hashes should match. So that's how passwords should be handled in websites. So if they're sending your password in text, in an email, then they're not hashing your passwords correctly. They're probably storing them in plain text where they can retrieve that text and send it back to you. If their database was to ever be compromised, then all those passwords would be shown in plain text. And then an attacker could just use those passwords to log in as you. That's sort of the point of hashing the passwords, is so that if a database is compromised, just by looking at the hash, they can't use that to automatically know what your password is. They won't be able to know what your password is automatically. Now, with passwords, you don't just hash them. You also, it's not just about hashing. There's a certain way they have to be hashed. And there's techniques called SHA-1, SHA-256, MD5. MD5 and SHA-1 are older algorithms, and it's actually not recommended, I don't think, anymore that you go with those. If you're building a brand new application, well, before I move further, there are probably still current applications that use SHA-1, and that's fine. But if you're building a brand new application, then I would move on past SHA-1 and use something like SHA-256 or something like that. These are password algorithms. Not only should you be hashing the passwords, they should be salted, and there's a technique called stretching. At least I think that's what it's called. Basically, salting is taking another string of data and injecting it in with your password to make it even more random. And stretching is basically doing that multiple times over. So, without getting any more too technical on that, that's sort of how that works. I use my stuff. It's called bcrypt. Bcrypt is an older technology. It's been around for a while. And I think it sort of stood the test of time. It basically does the hashing, the salting, and the stretching for you. So yeah, that's pretty much what I use on my applications. If you're looking for something. And the last thing I would say is your website should always be HTTPS. So, years ago, Edward Snowden came out and revealed to the nation that the NSA was, snooping on the American citizens and released all this information basically proving that, right? So, at that point in time, there were a lot of websites that were, happily using HTTP. So HTTP is the protocol for connecting to your website or for websites. HTTPS basically is an encrypted protocol. So it creates secure encrypted connections for your websites and things like that. So after all this stuff with Edward Snowden came out, then we started seeing more and more sites moving towards HTTPS, where encryptions were connected directly from the browser to the server, and and yeah, we've continued to see that growth. Nowadays, there are less and less sites that just use plain HTTP, and more sites that use HTTPS. So one of the things that I do is I actually use, as part of my support plan for my customers, is I use HTTPS. They get an SSL certificate to create HTTPS connections with their websites. And I do that with all of my customers. And, a lot of the other, almost any other website provider will do that also. Squarespace, Wix. Well, I don't know about Wix. I think they do it. I know Squarespace does. WordPress.com does as well. So yeah, HTTPS is really the only way to go now to secure that connection. And that's about it. So here's another bonus thing I wanted to just throw out there. I create for my customers, I use the Cake PHP framework for a lot of stuff. One of the things they do, and a lot of the development frameworks do this, and so this is something that I use for almost all my customers to help with security on their websites, to protect against a lot of these things like form manipulation or cross-site requests for forgery and XSS and things like that. Is I do a couple of things. I use what is called a CSRF token on my forms. So what happens is, whatever my server sends to the client is what it expects to get back. So if it gets back a form that has been modified from what it originally sent, then it just trashes the request at that point, and it doesn't do anything with it because that is how a lot of websites are hacked, And then one of the things I do to protect against XSS is I use tools like there's a tool called HTML Purifier that I use, especially if a form element is expecting HTML content. I will run it through the HTML Purifier, and basically that strips out any kind of malicious JavaScript. I think it strips out JavaScript, period. Because normally that's not something that you would want submitted, And so if it is, then you have to make exceptions and program those exceptions and all that. But 99% of the time, JavaScript is not something you want submitted through a web form. So, we use tools like that to make sure that malicious JavaScript isn't coming through. So yeah, that's my bonus tip for the day. There's something that we do for our customers. So anyway, that's about it. If you have any questions, let me know. And respond to this or shoot me an email or contact me through my web form or my chat thing on my website. And I will get back with you as soon as possible. Thanks. Bye.